Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the College Info Geek Podcast, the show that helps you become a more effective student. My name is Thomas Frank, and I am here with my good friend, Martin Bamey. Martin, what is up? What's going on, man?
I'm just chilling, having myself some cherry blossom tea.
Cherry blossom.
Keeping it real, probably.
This is very different than my other podcast. I'm also drinking some Lapsang Souchong tea.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, it's basically the opposite, isn't it?
Why? Is yours like all sweet and light and flowery?
No, I mean because we're drinking tea.
Oh, yeah, and then on Listen Money Matters, I like sometimes drink beer, but honestly, usually I drink tea. It's like the show that started out as a, hey, look, let's drink beer and talk about finance, but I just drink tea for the most part on that. So maybe it's not
close enough. It gives me none of the same feelings.
It's true.
As beer.
It's quite different. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. Because we're not really tackling a topic specific to college. This is a topic that I think goes into the living of a better life in general. And basically what we're going to do in this episode is we are going to analyze a book that we both read called The Art of Loving from a philosopher named Erich Fromm. And I think he published this like back in the 50s or something.
I feel like it was the 50s. I didn't double check that, but I feel
I'm going to look at it. There's going to be lots of page turning sounds in this one. Yeah, it looks like 1956. So, story time. I was in New York a little while ago because turns out there are no good flights from Des Moines to Vermont. And I had been hired to speak in Vermont at a college. And if I were to fly from Des Moines to Vermont, it would have been literally 13-hour layover each way. And I don't like sleeping in airports. So the co-host of my other podcast, Andrew, he happens to live basically in New York City, like right across the river in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I emailed him and I'm like, yo, dude, can I come stay a night at your place so I can do like a flight to New York and then a flight from New York to Vermont, which turned out to be cheaper than the direct flight and also had none of the waiting in airports for 13 hours. And he's like, well, turns out we're going to be in Vermont like 3 days before you go there. So why don't you come to New York like a week early, babysit my cat, and basically live in our apartment? And I'm like, all right.
Yeah, it's a pretty awesome deal.
Yeah, it was really cool because the first time I ever went to New York, I picked the wrong place to stay. It was like a really, really bad hostel. It wasn't like a horror movie scene or anything, but it was like this just really cheap. It was like $60 a night, which can get you basically the quarters of a king in certain cities around the world, but not in New York City. Not in Manhattan, at least. So the place I stayed was like, they were like blaring music in the lobby, and then it was like these really dingy shared rooms, and the bed springs were so creaky that it was just terrible. And the bed was not even tall enough or like long enough for me, so I was like in the fetal position all night long. And so basically,
it sounds horrible.
It ruined my first trip to New York. And I had just come from Tokyo, so I was like, all impressed with how amazing Japan was, and then like New York just totally left this sour taste in my mouth. But I have since been back there 3 or 4 times. And I can tell you, the place you stay has a large effect on your opinion of a city. Like, it's very important, which is why I probably will go with Airbnb like forever when I travel if I can, because it really does make a difference. Anywho, you probably know that I cannot resist bookstores.
Who can?
I don't know. I don't want to meet the person who can. There is a bookstore in New York City called Strand, and it is the last vestige of what used to be called Bookway, I think is what they called it. Like many, many years ago, there was like this entire street in New York City with tons and tons of bookstores. And Strand is basically the last remaining one, the last one that holds out among the tide of Barnes and Nobles'. And happened to go there. It's an amazing store. Not quite as cool as Powell's Books in Portland, but I would say it's a close second for like biggest and coolest bookstore that I've been to. And I was gonna buy this book called Mindware, and it was like a total typical me book. It was like tools for thinking more clearly or something. But I don't like hardcover books because book jackets get destroyed so easily. So I put it down and I was like, I'll do that later. Maybe I won't buy anything. And then as I was walking out, I just happened to see this book, Art of Loving, on one of those tables that they use to try to get you to buy things on the way out, I guess. And picked it up and I was like, the back sounds kind of interesting. It's not like I usually don't read philosophy, but I had a few relationships in college that broke up partly because of things I did wrong. And ever since then, I've been very, very interested in, I guess, practicing the art of not making my girlfriend hate me.
That's a very important art.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty important art. It's a pretty bad way of stating it. Maybe a better way to say it is I just wanted to be a lot more deliberate about building a close and fulfilling and rewarding relationship with my girlfriend. And I kind of knew in my head from things I'd read in the past and from experiences that love really isn't something you fall into. It's not like this I don't know, it's not like what it looks like in the movies. It's not like, oh, you find the one person that's meant for you and then you're happy forever because this person's perfect for you. And I think there's so many messages in our society that kind of play to that vision of love, that kind of pander to that vision where it's like, oh, it's going to be great and they're going to do so many things for you and you will be loved. And this book is like the antithesis to that. It was this guy, Eric Fromm's attempt to convince you that no, love is an art, and as an art, it's something that requires active discipline and practice. And the book is basically like a breakdown of like the theory of why love is an art, what it's about, like what it's for, and then it moves into a little bit of an interim chapter about why he thinks Western society is actually set up to discourage the practice of love. And then the last and much more short than any other part of the book chapter is about the practice of it. And I ended up learning that the practice of love, according to Eric Fromm, is basically analogous to the practice of being a good person and improving your life in many different ways. So I actually took a lot of lessons that can be applied to many areas of life. It's not just about loving. It's kind of like, here's how to be a disciplined, successful, very deliberate person that lives with meaning and purpose, dressed up in the language of love. That's kind of what I took from it. Is that, I mean, I kind of asked you to read it, potentially for the podcast, but is that what you got out of it as well?
Yeah, a lot. I guess I got a lot out of it in the last part as well, where he's talking about the mastery of the art of love, because I really liked all the comparisons to the mastery of love as to the mastery of any other art. Like, it's not something, you can't just wing it over and over and over, and then it's magically going to work. You have to try. You have to get good at it. You have to improve yourself consciously. And I think that that's something that's not communicated very often. I think we're encouraged to just kind of wing it, and then if it doesn't work, then, well, it must not have been the right person. Wing it again. Wing it next time. Just roll the dice over and over without really doing a lot of introspection. And this book seemed to encourage a lot of that.
Yeah, exactly. I think like the first page kind of states the problem, where it says like most people see the problem of love primarily as that of being loved rather than that of loving, of one's capacity to love. And hence the problem is, for them, is how to be loved, how to be lovable. And the pursuit of this is they look to cultivate things like their looks and their money. And he kind of talks about this this kind of like market, almost like a meat market in today's society, where it's like basically you want to cultivate quantifiable qualities of yourself, which you can use to essentially trade for something equal to what you can offer. And that's why people put a lot of value on, how they look or how successful they are, how much money they have and the stuff they have, instead of cultivating the actual qualities that lead to fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, doesn't he compare it to like basically becoming lovable, in quotes, to a lot of people amounts to like being more popular and good at stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Attractive, I
It's
think, is the term that he uses.
yeah, it's just
Being attractive package. That's the one. So I want to get into some of his ideas for what it actually takes to love correctly. He's got some really interesting ideas about why love of the self is actually not a contradiction for love of other people. Like there's kind of this idea that if you love yourself, you're actually narcissistic, you're selfish, and that is like the opposite of being a loving person. But he kind of argues like the opposite is true. Self-love is required to love others correctly. But let's get into like the philosophy of this at first, because I thought it was interesting how he sort of established the reason that we need love in the first place. And that was all about like separation, right?
yeah. He goes into how like the human condition
Mm-hmm.
is just we need to overcome our feeling of separateness. He made some remarks as to how in the womb we are basically one with our mothers,
That's right, yeah.
and then when we're born, we don't really notice it yet, but soon after we find out that things are different than us. Our environment is separate from us,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in the womb it's all basically you. The world is you, as far as you're aware.
Yeah.
And he went through a whole lot of examples and several types of ways that people try to overcome their separateness. But his main point is that humans want to feel some sense of unity.
Right. And I think he did make a point of also saying like the reason that we are so afraid of the separateness and everything is because we are the only organisms that realize we're mortal and that have to live with the knowledge that we'll die. And at least in his vision, and I would say it's probably pretty accurate to say like most other animals and forms of life on this planet aren't aware they will die, or maybe they are aware, but it's not something that gives them an existential crisis on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, like they're not thinking about the future so much.
Yeah.
That
They're just I need food, and that's about it.
Yeah, I feel like most organisms are probably pretty good at living in the present and saying, that's
Right.
dangerous, I'm going to go now, or I'm safe, I'm going to rest.
Yeah.
Like,
So he kind of
as opposed
establishes
to, what do I do in 20 years? I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't even think it's like it is that what do I do in 20 years, that uncertainty, but it's also just like this knowledge that like I am separate from everything else because of my knowledge of my mortality, and the pain of that knowledge, the pain of knowing that my life is temporary, is overwhelming. So I need to do something to avoid it, or to dull it, or to get it out of my life. And he kind of establishes like the overall idea of being connected to other people as the way to get rid of that separation or to overcome it. So I think he had like 5 ways that people do this. One being the first one that everyone does, which is parental love. And the parental love area is the one disagreement I have with the book. And it's the one area where you realize that, yes, this person did write this 65 years ago. So there are some archaic beliefs, I believe.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that one before we get into the other ones. So he talks about parental love, and he talks about how like there's maternal and the paternal love. And the one part I disagreed with was maybe I disagree with the entire conception of what do they call unconditional love and conditional love being essentially feminine and masculine.
Oh, yeah. I think the genderification of those types of love is probably a little archaic, but I do think that the idea, like what it boils down to is that he claims maternal love is more of an unconditional love, and that paternal love is more of a you have to earn my love
Right.
kind of situation. And if you just take away maternal and paternal, ignore the genderification of those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really interesting that he's claiming that humans need to grow up with both an unconditional love, you are worth being loved, you are useful as you are, and also a conditional one that
Right.
teaches us we can have some control.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the main reason that I think I disagree with the conception of the gender separation uh, as a whole, but like the main prickly point I think that a lot of people are going to hit in this book is when he says like someone who is not uh, not heterosexual, they are lacking a
They were
component
like,
of that.
yeah, they were
So
like
it's like
missing one of the right things.
so you're
or
like
something.
fundamentally your ability
That-
to love is hampered if you have that sexual attachment, and I think that's the archaic, outdated
Yeah,
belief that he held.
that was the part of the book where I was like, yeah, that's old, but
Mm-hmm.
really this
Though
was
I do have to
written
say,
with the psychology of the time, so you just kind of
exactly,
have to
and you can kind of tell
force it
like
to fit.
Fromm's philosophy is in itself a bit of an evolution and a step forward from Freudian philosophy or psychoanalysis, where like Freud was like ultra focused on the sexual things, and Fromm starts to move out of that, but it's still not where we are today.
No, and I don't know that he would I'm sure that he would be able to adjust these theories a little bit
Yeah,
with the data that is available to us
yeah,
in
exactly.
2016.
Because I mean, he is going off of like psychoanalytic data from half of a century ago. So that's the one like footnote I have about this book. The one thing that really stuck out to me is like, oh no, I don't actually agree with that.
Yeah. If any of you go out to read this book, just know that there's that like one line
Yep.
where you're going to be like, I don't know about that.
But I gotta say, like the rest of it I thought was really kind of eye opening, especially the end part of it. So I wouldn't like not recommend the book because of that one line. I would just to say like, no book should be taken completely at face value. No book should be treated as like this thing upon an altar that is can be giving you like ultimate wisdom. Like it's obviously
you need
should
to
be
adapt
thinking
it.
critically to everything and integrating what is good into your worldview. Like Bruce Lee says, adapt what is useful. But I do think the concept of this need for both unconditional and conditional love is very interesting. And I think it would be easy to assume that conditional love is a bad thing, right? Because you're like, well, unconditional love is good because they love me for who I am. Why would I have any need for conditional love where I must do something to win the approval of someone? But actually, he kind of breaks down the good and the bad of both, because with unconditional love, the good is that you don't have to worry about doing anything, about living up to any certain standard to have that, And I would say like it is probably more common for the mother to show more of that, just because the mother is the one that usually spends most time taking care of a baby. It's not always the way it works, but I know like that's definitely the way it worked in my family. My dad went to work and my mom was the one home taking care of me. The bad end though is if that love is absent as a child or in any other stage of your life, because it is unconditional, that means you can't attain it. So if you're missing that from your life, it's like very frustrating because it's absent and there's no way for you to do something to get it back, or there is no way for you
you
to
have no
it,
control. You're
come
just
into your life. Yeah. So I mean that's the advantage of conditional love, which he posits as fatherly love, where father is like, you need to be like me. You need to uphold these rules I have. You need to live up to these standards that I believe are good and right ways to live. And if you do, then you have won my love and my approval. And if you don't, then you will be punished and I will try to discipline you to change you. So it's on one hand, it's like, oh, well, I don't get your love unless I act in a certain way. That can seem bad. But on the other hand, you can say like, that is love that is attainable through my own actions. I have control. I have efficacy over that.
Yeah, and I think really he emphasizes that these are like most important during your childhood development to like teach you can control things and to teach you that you're worth
that's
something.
right. Yeah, because he does go into
because
that.
later on he posits that you like assimilate them into how
Right.
you love afterward as an adult, how you see.
Yeah, when you're a kid, your fatherly love comes from your father, your motherly love comes from your mother, according to him. And then when you grow up and you mature, you internalize both.
Yeah.
And they become parts of you and you become a more mature, capable person.
So they're kind of like an emotional training
Mm-hmm.
of sorts, a love training.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to the ways he talks about being connected, he talks about the parental love, and then he talks about like one of the first ways that humanity connected to each other were through what he called orgiastic experiences, and that could include things like sex, but it also could include things like taking drugs together,
Any sort of trance.
any sort of trantic experience, those kind of things. That's part. And then he also talks about like the worship of deities, so religion comes into it. And regardless of like what your religion may be and what you believe in it does, like every religion has a component of connecting the person either to other people or to a deity. So it is a way to be separate from that mortality and from that knowledge that your life is temporary. And then he talks about like societal attachment, basically through like basically cultural norms. You are part of America because you do American things, or you're part of, Japan because you do Japanese things, or you're part of your work because you do the things that the people at your work do. So everyone adheres to these cultural norms to feel connected to society, essentially.
Yeah, he goes a lot into just like a lot of things that I've read in the last year, actually, about how a sense of community is just incredibly important for happiness in general.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, so there is this second chapter. So this book is only 3 chapters, but the first chapter is 76 pages long. It's a pretty short book overall. I think it's like 120 odd pages, so it won't take long to read. But yeah, a good like over half of it is the first chapter, which is on the theory of love. But then he talks about love and its disintegration in contemporary Western society, and I think this is where he's talking about societal attachment, because he talks a bit about how capitalism sort of commoditizes everything. And he has this quote here. He says, "Modern capitalism needs men who cooperate smoothly and in large numbers, who want to consume more and more, and whose tastes are standardized and can be easily influenced and anticipated. It needs men who feel free and independent, not subject to any authority or principle or conscious, yet willing to be commanded to do what is expected of them, to fit into the social machine without friction, who could be guided without force, led without leaders, prompted without aim, except the one to make good, to be on the move, to function, to go ahead." And what he says about like, as society gets bigger and bigger, as business gets more and more concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and more people become essentially cogs in the machine, is what he's saying, is that men become alienated from their communities, and life becomes just this pursuit of maximum profit, maximum efficiency. And I think like there is a grain of truth there. Would you agree? I mean, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that naturally, and you can just look at this, like the way capitalism has developed, eventually we're all more focused on like moving up in our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
We're all more focused on success and efficiency. Whereas I don't know any of my neighbors' names, nor do I really care. So the sense of community is much, much different than it would have been back when we didn't have to worry about what was happening 300 miles away because we could sustain ourselves entirely here.
Yeah, exactly.
The world was smaller in a way.
Yeah.
Or bigger, depending on how you want to look at that. You could say it either way. But
now, when I read this chapter,
yeah,
I didn't get this like dystopian Brave New World idea of the. It wasn't as if like a shiny veneer was being torn off of my view of the world as it is, and oh no, I saw like the horrible underbelly of what the world truly is, and we need to overthrow everything and become
create a prog rock album.
Become the band. Yes, that's not what I saw, because I agreed with part of it. I think that modern society is indeed set up in a way to encourage the commoditization of life and of labor, and it does encourage people to focus more on pursuits that do connect them less to their communities. But we also have a lot of freedom to change that and to make deliberate decisions to be more connected with people and to focus less on the need to acquire things and to kind of be as efficient as possible. And I don't think that it requires going next door and particularly becoming best friends with your next door neighbor.
Well, that's good because I didn't want to.
Yeah. I mean, this guy wrote this in 1950, but we have ways of connecting to people that are very far away from us. If you've got friends in different cities, in different states, different countries, like I know I have very fulfilling relationships with people who do not live in my state, because I get to see them often enough when I travel, or I talk to them on Skype and stuff like that. And one thing I learned about in a marketing class of mine back in high school is that basically there's this concept of component lifestyles, where back in the 50s and before, people sort of identified as like doing one thing. And now it's sort of broken up into like, I am, well, actually we were talking about like Twitter bios the other day.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm a, skateboarder, guitar player, blah, 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 blah. I'm all these things. And in marketing, this is called like the component lifestyle concept, where your life is segmented into several components where you have little mini identities. You are the skateboarder, you are the musician, you are the programmer if you happen to work at a programming place. And I think you can have very fulfilling relationships in all of these little components, which might be with different people than who live right next to you. But it is just about like being deliberate about listening to them and trying to build a relationship with them rather than just diverting or, making it all a diversion for fun. So that's kind of what I took from that chapter. I don't know. Maybe it was like a Marxist hell for you, but
No, it's not like we're not allowed to go form senses of community. It's just it's not as automatic. It's not as ingrained into what will happen. You can choose to join a whole bunch of clubs. You can do volunteer work. You can have friends. You can be really close with a large family. You can choose to do these things. It's just is not as automatic because we get distracted by how am I going to make more money to pay my bills more easily so that I can do more things. You're distracted. And like maybe it would have been scary if he was like, and you have no choice. The world is over. But you can absolutely choose to feel more connected to a group if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. So on this idea of the theory of love, one of the most interesting things was that he discourages the idea that you need to imbue certain people or certain objects with the majority of your love. I think he discourages the idea that love is something to imbue into any specific thing, and rather he advocates this concept that love is something that you do, and it's something that should be given equally to both yourself and to every living thing. Now, obviously, there's different qualities of love. There's erotic love, which is between two people that have decided to be in a relationship. There's brotherly love, which he posits as not just to your family, not just to your tribe, but to all people. And then there's like the paternal and things like that, and love of deities as well. But I think the most interesting was like this whole section about how self-love and selfishness are actually opposite terms. I think when he talks about selfishness is like this idea that you either love yourself or you love other people, and if you love yourself, you cannot love other people. And I think he kind of nixes that in favor of an idea where loving yourself is basically just a way to be confident in yourself, to be able to do it for other people as well. I don't know. I guess I'm not articulating it well. How did you interpret it?
Well, I really just interpreted it kind of the same, but you don't have to not love other people to love yourself. And in fact, loving yourself, if not done in a ridiculous narcissistic way, will in general make you maybe better capable of loving the other people around you because you can appreciate things more.
Right. Yeah, so I suppose like that's like selfishness, as if you're only caring about what you can take from life, only caring about what you want. And he actually says that if you're like this, you actually hate yourself. You don't love yourself, because if you did love yourself, you would want to give all that you can to other people. So I want to talk about what is probably the most useful part of this book, which is the practice of love. And it is the shortest chapter, and he kind of starts it out like with this disclaimer that like if you think this is a self-help book where I'm going to give you like 15 tips to love better, like you're going to be sorely disappointed because it's not.
We should have done that for this podcast.
15 tips to be a better lover. Yeah.
That should have been the title of this episode. It's too late.
It still can be.
Well, we're going to need to throw in 15 tips.
That's true. It's not going to be.
It's not going to
I'm going to go ahead and just not do that. Yeah. I did want to make one note about brotherly love before we get into this, because actually I thought this was really insightful. So he sort of talks about, the golden rule, like in elementary school, they were always like, live by the golden rule, do unto others as you would prefer them to do unto you, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of talks about like how this is sort of a perversion of the original love thy neighbor as thyself idea of brotherly love, because do unto others as you would have them do unto you is an expression of fairness. It's like fairness ethics. I do this for you. In exchange, you do this for me. It's fair. And what he says is like, brotherly love isn't about fairness ethics. It's about feeling responsible for the well-being of other people as much as you do for yourself, instead of being like, I did my part, so you go do your part. He kind of establishes these two concepts as opposite, whereas brotherly love is a connected feeling. Fairness ethics are feelings of separation. I've done my part, now you go do yours. You go do you, I'm gonna do me, that kind of stuff. And it reminded me of like, have you ever been at a restaurant or maybe like a movie theater where someone just like leaves their popcorn and pop in the seat, and then someone's like, dude, you should clean that up. And they say, oh, well, that's the worker's job to do. Like, that's their job. So it's like you justify basically being a dick by saying, this person's being paid to clean up after me. Like, it's fair. They are serving me because they're being paid to, and I've paid for my ticket, so I can basically be a dick, and it's totally cool.
As long as you've done your bare minimum.
Yeah, the social contract has been established. So that's like that's the golden rule thing. That's like the fairness thing. And I don't even know if it's the golden rule specifically, but it's like, it's definitely thinking in terms of what's fair. And the brotherly love way to think about it would be like, no, that person in the vest with the name tag, like, yeah, they're getting paid to work here, but I should care about them as much as I care about myself. And if it was me doing that, like, I wouldn't want someone to just think of me that way. Like, I would want them to feel responsible and to try to make my day as good as it possibly can be, and I'm going to try to make their day as good as it can possibly be. And I think when you think in those terms, you stop thinking so selfishly and you start thinking about like, what can I do to make someone else's day a little bit better? This is why every time when I go into the coffee shop, I like make sure to thank the person when they're done with my drink, even if they've like kind of moved on. I just like say it to them, because I know what it's like to work in a crappy food, like fast food place. And I'm sure like they're having a pretty lame day, probably just like being bored at work. People are rushing them and complaining. And I'm like, all right, I want to make their day a little bit better because I care. And hopefully other people will do that same thing as well. Instead of just being like, well, I paid for my drink, I don't have to say anything, I'm going to leave.
Yeah, so it's like a more full version of the golden rule, if anything, rather than like the bare minimum.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you could state the golden rule the same way. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How well do you enforce
it is really what makes the difference.
It's a different underlying motivation. Fairness ethics say, do unto others as they would have them do unto you, because you want them to do unto you a certain way, whereas the opposite concept is, do unto others as you would have them do to you, because you want them to be happy, because you care about them and you want the best for them.
Like even if they don't do the same thing back necessarily, you're just being good.
Right, and that's much more conducive to what Fromm's underlying motivation for everything we do is, which is to cut down on the pain of separation, to feel more connected.
Yeah, I really thought it was interesting. I believe he said that the fairness sort of ethics, that transactional idea of fairness ethics is, I believe he said, one of the like biggest things that we've got morally out of capitalism, like one of the biggest things that developed out of that.
Hmm.
was just because so many things are transactional. So this
Right.
idea of what becomes fair either way was very well developed now.
Yeah, because as in his terms, everything's been like boiled down to what you can offer on the market, and everything can be quantified. Um, which reminds me of the Crash Course episode on money, which is Crash Course World History, season 2. I don't remember which episode it is, but it's the money one, and I'll link to it in the show notes. Talks about this theory that's espoused by David Graeber in his book Debt: The First 5,000 Years, where he posits basically the opposite of what economists have always said about the formation of money. Because economists always say, oh, there was barter economies where people were trading like half of their goat for a sack of barley. And then they all were like, that's inefficient. Let's make money instead. And what anthropologists find is there is no recorded example of a barter economy. Instead, there were just tight-knit societies that traded things on debt. So it's like, hey, dude, I need a sickle to cut down my field. Can I borrow one? And then you're like, sure. And then there's kind of like this unstated knowledge that like I did you a solid and then you'll do me a solid later on, but it's not quantified. It's not like tit for tat. It
was
not
just
expecting
in general,
a complete like
help me out.
Yeah,
later.
it's not like, oh, you owe me that exact sickle. It's like, oh, actually, I need some food for my goat. Do you have any? And they're like, yeah, sure. Like people lived in these tight-knit societies, and everyone owes everything to everyone because they just work together. And once the development of currency became kind of ubiquitous, now you have a way to form debt that is impersonal, quantifiable, and transferable. So no longer is it person A and person B are inextricably linked to each other through unspoken debts. It's now, oh, I lent you $20 and I can sell that debt to some faceless corporation and now you owe $20 to them. And there was no bond of love. There was no bond of caring. There was nothing there to keep you guys connected except for this obligation that has been quantified. And when everything becomes that way, it becomes so much harder to connect to people because everything is framed in terms of quantified, exact, fair exchanges. So when he talks about the practice of becoming a better, I don't want to say the word lover because that's like, I think the connotation is like a erotic lover.
Yeah, this isn't as steamy as it sounds.
It really isn't. The practice of being better at love in all its forms turned out to be mainly a chapter about how to be a good person, right?
Yeah, and it had that aspect, and it also had like the just you need to be disciplined about this side of it. The sort of this is a real art. You need to treat it as if it were an art, which means that you have to actually care enough to improve your abilities at it, which is making you a better person.
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of my favorite stuff came out of that last chapter.
Mine too. Yeah, I mean, I would still recommend reading the whole thing so you can kind of get the foundation, but the last chapter I think holds the most usable.
Yeah, I think it's the most like adaptable to your personal life.
A lot of it, I gotta say, you're gonna read it and you're gonna go, at least I did. I read it and I was like, well, obviously, but it's one of those things where it's like stated and thrown out in the open. It's like, no, you need to do this, and maybe you have heard this before, but
oh yeah, because we all know how to do tons of things that would be good, but it doesn't mean we actually take the time to
exactly. So he talks about love being an art, and he says first we have to define what goes into the practice of any art, and he specifically talks about mastery of an art requiring discipline, concentration, and patience. Especially with discipline, and this was like the first thing where I was like, yeah, this is everything, not just love, because he says like, first of all, the practice of an art requires discipline. I shall never be good at anything if I do not do it in a disciplined way. Anything I do only if I am in the mood, quote unquote, may be a nice or amusing hobby, but I should never become a master in the art.
Oh, this is the second time you've literally just same exact quote that I highlighted.
Did you have it written down?
Yeah.
Yep, I got my book flag right in there.
It's a good quote.
Yeah. And he says, but the problem is not only that of discipline in the practice of the particular art, say practicing every day for a certain amount of hours, but it is that of discipline of one's whole life. One might think that nothing is easier to learn for modern man than discipline. Does he not spend 8 hours a day in a most disciplined way at a job which is strictly routinized? And I think this was really insightful here, because he talks about like the fact that we go to work and the fact that we go through these highly structured, strict schedules during the day actually encourages us to push that stuff away in other pursuits, which is why I think so many people have their jobs and then relaxation, right?
Oh yeah, I actually highlighted this huge passage about the same thing. I'm sure you have it over there.
I have here it is. Yeah. Uh, so he says, how does one practice discipline? Our grandfathers would have been much better equipped to answer this question. Their recommendation was to get up in the morning, not to indulge in unnecessary luxuries, and to work hard. This type of discipline has obvious shortcomings. It was rigid and authoritarian, was centered around the virtues of frugality and saving, and in many ways was hostile to life. But in reaction to this kind of discipline, there has been an increasing tendency to be suspicious of any discipline and to make undisciplined, lazy indulgence in the rest of one's life the counterpart and balance for the routinized way of life imposed on us during the 8 hours of work. To get up at a regular hour, to devote a regular amount of time during the day to activities like meditating, reading, listening to music, walking, not to indulge, at least not beyond a certain minimum, in escapist activities like mystery stories or movies, or I guess video games, he would say today, and not to overeat or overdrink are some obvious and rudimentary rules. It's essential, however, that discipline should not be practiced like a rule imposed on oneself from the outside, but that it becomes an expression of one's own will, that it is felt as pleasant, and that one slowly accustoms oneself to a kind of behavior which one eventually would miss if one stopped practicing it. So I think basically he's saying like the whole like 8 hours of work and school and all the crap we go to makes it really tempting to react to that negatively in your free time and be like, no, I just worked an 8-hour day. I just did all this stuff everyone told me to do and followed all the rules. I'm going to go do whatever I want now.
Yeah, you're like rebelling because
right.
You've been forced to use discipline towards things you didn't want to do.
Exactly.
Why should you trust discipline?
But the problem is like the division of labor and specialization means that you're spending that 8 hours doing one thing that is not necessarily meant to make you a better person in any way, but is instead meant to maximize the profits of whoever you're working for, even if it's yourself, right?
Yeah, and I really think that that's an important part, is whether anything is being seen through the eyes of who is really disciplining you.
Mm-hmm.
Because even when you're doing something like maybe if I go to exercise, if I feel like fine, I'll go exercise because everybody tells me I'm supposed to exercise, then I'll feel like it's a chore. It won't feel like it's me. It won't feel like my will was I'm going to create myself as a healthier person. Then maybe I would feel when I exercised like I had power, like I could change things. Right. But if I view it as something that other people are forcing me to do, then it's going to seem unwelcome.
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be rooted in some underlying motivation you have yourself. I can't tell you and make you want something just by the virtue of me telling you about it.
Yeah.
So he goes on to talk about concentration, and I kind of skipped around a little bit because he sort of defines discipline, concentration, and patience before talking about the practice of discipline, which I read from that bit about rejecting discipline in free time was from that area. I think he talked about like concentration really is rooted in the ability to focus on one thing at one time. And this is where I started drawing parallels to Deep Work, which is the book that Cal Newport wrote and that I think it was episode 100 we talked about. There were actually several parallels to other books that I found in this book, which kind of were like weird. Like, that book I said I put down at the Strand because it was hardcover?
Yeah.
It was like Mindware Tools for Better Thinking or something like that. It'll be in the show notes. I haven't read it yet, but I opened to a random page in the Strand and it was talking about normal like Greek logical reasoning versus Eastern dialectic reasoning, and how like Eastern dialectic reasoning it embraces paradox more, and Greek logic kind of says no paradox can't exist, that kind of stuff. This book actually referenced that, which I found very weird because
so
I
just
like
the weirdest
specifically
connections between these books.
yeah, I almost like specifically picked up The Art of Loving because it seemed like the antithesis to like this cold, logical, improve your brain book. And then there's parallels to that. And then this concentration of it was just being like, you need to learn to act in one focused way. You need to learn to be by yourself without reading, listening to the radio, smoking, drinking, whatever. And once you can do that, he says paradoxically, the ability to be alone is the condition for the ability to love. Anyone who tries to be alone with himself will discover how difficult it is. He will begin to feel restless, fidgety, or even to sense considerable anxiety, and he will be prone to rationalize his unwillingness to go on with this practice by thinking it has no value, it's just silly, it takes too much time, so on and so on and so forth. And when you're unable to concentrate in your own life, then your ability to concentrate on your relationship with one other person, to listen, I think this is the most important thing, to listen without looking away or having the compulsion to check your phone or to do something else, and to listen and not be at the same time trying to formulate your own clever responses, to actually listen and try to really get yourself in the other person's head and understand how they're feeling. That ability is diminished when you're unable to concentrate in any capacity. So meditation equals being better at loving, I guess.
Maybe. I mean, it's cool. Meditation's good.
Yeah, you probably meditate a lot more than I do.
All the time.
Actually, I barely meditate anymore. And I'm okay with that. Like I think I'm cultivating some other habits right now that I'm okay kind of doing those in isolation for a while. But for a good long time, I did meditate just for like 3 minutes a day, and I would try to focus on like counting my breath, but I know there are other ways to meditate, and all of them can help to build your ability to focus. What exactly do you do when you meditate? Do you just be present? Do you have like any sort of like breathing exercise, or do you try to concentrate on any one thing?
Well, it depends. Most of the time I'm trying to blank out most thoughts and focus on like feeling, how is my body positioned? How am I breathing? Just kind of noticing things. And it's really helpful because I'm trying to work on my posture and things like that. So it's a lot of just, how am I existing right now, and trying to shut out other thoughts so that I'm not thinking, what am I going to do after I'm done meditating? I'm kind of hungry. Like that would defeat the whole purpose, you know? So it's a lot of just being in the moment. I'm trying to be as present as possible.
I deal with that problem so often. It's so often when I'm doing one thing and I am thinking about the next thing I'm going to do, or the last thing I want to do. And
it's so
he
hard
talks
to be
about
in the
that
present
in this
now.
book. He kind of does. One thing I remember him talking about was people kind of imbuing their love in nostalgia, like remembering relationships in the past as better than they were, but then not really giving a whole lot of thought to what's currently going on, or thinking that, 10 years down the line, we're going to have such a great relationship. We'll be so in tune with one another, but then you're not thinking about the now.
Yeah. And if you're not, trying in the now, then I don't know how 10 years from now is going to be magically better.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is all just building up to this ultimate conclusion that, like, to be good at loving other people and loving yourself, you have to cultivate the same qualities that allow you to be good at any art: discipline, concentration, and the last one being patience. He says to have an idea of what patience is, one only need watch a child learning to walk. It falls again, and yet it goes on trying, improving until one day it walks without falling. What could the grown-up person achieve if he had the child's patience and its concentration in the pursuits that are important to him? And I thought about this in terms of relationships in general, because relationships always have rocky parts, like always they have bad things that happen. And in my previous relationships, when I was a less mature person, I would let those get to me, and I would let those bad parts like basically tell me, oh, well, this is an indication that this isn't working. I need to get out. And what I've tried very hard to do, and it's very challenging, is anytime something goes wrong in my current relationship with Anna, I try to basically calm my mind and tell myself this will pass. We will work through this. There will not be, it can't be perfect. It can't be this trend line upward forever like we talked about in the last episode. And also, it may well be my fault. Like, I'm not going to, it's very easy to get defensive and assume that whatever the other person did was the wrong thing. But I try to force my brain to think like, okay, I could have part of the fault in this or all of the fault, and I'm going to let this kind of cool down, simmer down, like we talked about in Learn Helpless this episode, and then come back and ask like, okay, what did I do wrong? What did you do wrong? Let's talk about this rationally. And it requires a lot of patience, and it's very frustrating, but
you're just trying to be more conscious of how
Yes.
you handle things rather than
Exactly.
just saying things aren't perfect. My emotions say things are bad because I'm upset. And therefore everything's ruined. You're just trying to stop and say, wait a second. Like it's as if it were an art, like if I'm playing the piano, I'm learning a cool new song and I know it's going to be just this fantastic thing, but I screw it up a couple times. I don't freak out and throw my piano away, do I?
Yeah.
Not that I could lift it, but it would be, I mean, obviously this doesn't mean never end your relationship.
Right.
But it means that sometimes you just got to sit back and be like, okay, is this bad? You have to be more conscious of what's going on in the present moment. Don't blind yourself and assume things are better in the future. But what can you do now?
I can't remember if this book talked about it, but I did read about somewhere how like, a lot of marriages are arranged. A lot of times couples don't meet each other until the wedding night. And we think that practice is, horrible. We're like, well, you're not letting people fall in love on their of their own accord. And then those cultures that do it will counteract that notion with this whole idea of like, it's not about falling in love. It's about standing in it. It's about building something together. And the rates of divorce are much lower in a lot of those cultures. Now, I will attribute part of that, maybe even a majority of it, to societal norms that discourage divorce. But there is potentially a component of that in the absence of this idea that you fall in love with your soulmate, with the one, with the person you are compatible with, quote unquote, and the replacement of that ideal with a different ideal of you must build something together. It will take a long time. It will be tough, but you're building it together. And you don't know what it's going to look like when you start. And that takes patience. I think a good way to think about it would be in terms of like think of your relationship like a sport you practice, maybe, or like an instrument you practice, like you said, piano. I remember Monday when I went to skating practice, it was like one of my worst days ever. My coach was trying to teach me to spin, and I was just totally screwing up. I could not do it. I was super frustrated, and I felt like sick for an hour after practice because I was so nauseous from spinning. And even like the stuff I had already practiced, I was doing really badly at. And then today, I got there, and it was like the best day ever. Like everything went perfectly. It all came together, and I'm like, I've got a competition coming up in a few days, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm ready. Every move that I was just completely screwing up on Monday, I'm doing excellent now. So, obviously I shouldn't have thrown away my skates on Monday. It's just come back and try another day, and you're gonna be better. Now, you talked about how like you can't just always rely on this. Like there are situations where you should end a relationship. There is definitely an element of compatibility in here, and one of the things you do need to be very cognizant of is that the other person should be trying to have these same qualities in their life. If they're ultimately a selfish person, then you don't need to try to stick with them. But I do think a lot of our relationships end because we fail to be patient, we fail to actually listen, and we fail to try to work through these rocky parts of the relationships.
I'm sorry, I was listening in the moment. I wasn't prepared with a clever statement after that.
That's the problem with podcasting.
Oh yeah, that is the problem.
You can't love in podcasting, Martin. You have to have,
Nope, that's
have
true.
clever.
This is a
retorts
business,
all the
Martin.
time. Yeah,
Get with it.
business. So those were the three components of any art's mastery: discipline, concentration, patience. And then he talked mainly about one love specific thing you need to master. And that was the practice of overcoming what he calls narcissism and moving into objectivity. So what he means by that is that you need to work towards seeing things as they are instead of how they affect you. It's an objective view of reality instead of a very self-centered view of reality. And you have to be this way with everyone, not just with family, not just with your girlfriend or boyfriend. Like, instead of saying, oh, like I think he gave this example of a woman who calls a doctor and she's like, hey, I need to get an appointment. Can I come in today? And he's like, no, actually, I'm all booked up today. And her immediate response is, well, I'm only, 5 minutes down the road. And, her response is only based on how close she is to the doctor, how little time it will take her to get there. But she had absolutely no consideration for his schedule. So her view of reality was warped, and the only conditions that mattered were the ones that affected her. And that's not a very good way to love other people, because other people's experiences are separate from how you feel.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I really like how he gave examples like that are so easily relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Just as to how do we view the world as centering around us in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes when we're like, oh, this is a bad day, it's because like things happened that weren't exactly, synchronized with our perfect view of how a day should go. But it wasn't actually a bad day. It just didn't go exactly how we wanted it to go. And we put a little bit of that negativity bias in there when multiple things happen that aren't exactly how our narcissistic view of reality should be.
Yeah. Tons of negativity bias. It's very easy to fall victim to that.
Yeah, exactly. I did like, he talked about education. I can't remember which part of the book that this was in, but it was in my notes. And there was a quote I did want to say, because he talked about how like the loving view of education is to believe that every person has potential to become better. And he said that the opposite of education is manipulation, which is based on the absence of faith in the growth of potentialities and on the conviction that a child will be right only if adults put into him what is desirable and suppress what is undesirable. And that really spoke to me, because I think there kind of is this, there's often this goal to simply teach a specific curriculum to mold somebody in the way that you think they should be, instead of letting them turn into the person that they should be. This is one of those things that should I ever become a parent, I will try to keep like burrowed into my mind. Like, my child will not be exactly how I want them to be, because they have potential and I can't predict exactly what that potential will manifest itself as. I can just hope and try to subtly guide it in the right direction.
Yeah, and in a way that's less selfish. So
it is
just abiding by the treating others as you would want to treat yourself.
Exactly.
You would want yourself to have the freedom to pursue things and fulfill your talents as they come, in whatever direction they come.
Yeah, you want to be the master of your own destiny, so you should let other people do that as well, because their desire isn't any different. So the way I wanted to end this is I wanted to ask you, like, what qualities or what practices, and they don't necessarily have to have come from this book, but is there anything that you have specifically tried to keep in mind or tried to do in your current relationship with your girlfriend to make it develop better?
Well, I know that, obviously this is I could probably come up with a better answer given time, but I do know that I make a point to support her in the creative projects and she's doing, and try to keep in mind what she's going through and what kind of struggles there might be coming up, or what kind of situations are going on, as opposed to just help me with my stuff. I'm always very, very conscious of how I can be giving back and helping her with her personal journey towards things that she's trying to do that have nothing to do with me, because her success in the art world or in anything that part is really separate from me. It's completely not touching me. But I make a point to try and help her with that, just as she tries to help me work through things that really have no bearing on the time that she spends with me.
Mm.
So it's I try to not be selfish
Okay.
in that way. So we're focused on helping each other improve as individuals
Mm.
and also as a couple.
I like that a lot. So your focus isn't only on, how can I guide this person to understand me better, or to
Yeah, it's not how
to
can I make her a
contribute to
better
my
girlfriend.
ideal version of a relationship.
It's how can I help her be a better person in the way that
Mhm.
she wants to be, and how can I be a better person in the way I want to be, rather than saying our destiny is to just be a really good couple. We're both people in addition
Right.
to that.
Okay. Cool. The one I wanted to mention, there's a lot of things I've learned, especially the patience thing. But I think the biggest thing that I have learned about relationships is that you cannot be entirely focused on solutions when problems come up. And at risk of sounding sexist, I think this is something that guys might do a little more often than girls potentially.
Well, you wipe away the sexism by just saying society made it happen.
Society's
sexist, so the
Yeah, it could be.
results sometimes look sexist.
Yeah.
You know?
In my experience, I usually get like a I do this too reaction from guys more often. But I have always had this tendency to, whenever a problem comes up, it doesn't matter if it's from my girlfriend or from somebody else, I'm like, well, let's figure out how to solve it. Where it's like, well, I know how to solve it. Let's fix it right now. And that ended up, one of my girlfriends in the past broke up with me because mainly I did that, and I never offered any empathy. I never offered a shoulder to cry on. And I think we talked about this in the Learned Helplessness episode as well, where like there is this period where, something bad has happened, and that's stressful. And the person is not in the state of mind to solve the problem right now. Right now, they need to calm down. They need to wipe away the anxiety. And the best thing you can do as a friend, as a person who loves them, is to be empathetic, is to be that person who is there to support them through that hard time. And only once they're ready to solve the problem, to offer a solution. So in the past, I immaturely believed that empathy was just something that, like a delay tactic, basically. It's like, oh, well, the problem should be solved sooner rather than later. So empathy and telling everyone it's going to be okay is just this, just this lie, just this thing to let them wallow in pity for a while. Why don't we just solve it now? But I now realize that, like, emotions don't work that way. People don't work that way. If we were all robots and computers, it would work that way, but we're not. And
Not yet.
I need to act in a way that befits my biology.
Yeah.
And my human brain.
Yeah,
and
that's
the human
probably a
brains
better
of
way to go
everyone
about
else.
it.
Yeah. So those are basically all my thoughts on this book at this time. Do you have anything else to wrap up with, or should we just wrap up?
I think that about covers it. I mean, there's more to the
Mhm.
book. So if any one of you listeners goes out and read it, there are more things that he touches on. Creative activity being a way to overcome separateness, like being
Yeah.
an artist or a farmer or a cook, somebody who becomes one with their craft.
I forgot
That
about that one.
section's cool.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot to be pulled from this if you just read through it and adapt the phrases or the words that mean the most to your life at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you recommend the book overall?
I think that yeah, I would say it's a pretty good book to read as long as you're willing to overlook the 50s psychology
Yeah.
part. But I
would
think that
say
there are some good
overall.
lessons to learn from here, some good
Mhm.
at least analogies that you can adapt and make sense.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly haven't read that much philosophy, so I can't compare it to any comparable offerings. I do have Meditations by Marcus Aurelius on my shelf that I need to read soon, and my increased reading powers due to this 25 page per day challenge may actually
Oh yeah, that's
give
working
me
out.
the confidence I need to work my way through that book. I gotta say, like, 25 pages a day going through like this super dense nutrition science book is massively spiking my confidence in my ability to get through other kinds of books. Because for
Oh
a
yeah, it's
while,
gonna feel like nothing later.
yeah, I mean, I think after I quit Thinking Fast and Slow, because it's literally like replace nutrition science with psychology. The book is literally just study result after concept, and it's very dense, and I couldn't make my way through it because I didn't have structure and a goal. And I think ever since I quit reading that one, there's been a little bit of learned helplessness, actually.
Oh yeah, you're
I can't read
intimidated.
those kind of books. Yeah,
I can't read
I'll
big
get
study-based books.
exactly. But now I taught myself that yes, you can. So my confidence has expanded to a wider range of material. But overall, I would recommend this book. I think it's a pretty good read, and it's a short one too.
Oh yeah, it's not that long. You can't deny the value per page here.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's pretty high.
Yeah, it's pretty high. So if you've listened this far, one thing I would like to hear from you. If you want to, there's going to be a discussion thread in the Reddit. I've been putting all the podcast episodes there. I'd be curious to hear from you. Like, what do you guys think about these episodes that are a little more philosophical, a little more based around living a more fulfilling life? I think all these concepts are kind of integral in the journey to becoming a better person, which is the foundation of being a good student and is also kind of the ultimate goal of being a good student. At least I hope it is. I hope your goal as a student isn't just to make money, isn't just to, as Fromm says, to be able to offer more on the market, commoditized society. I hope it is to fulfill yourself in a more compelling way. But I would also be curious to know why, if you guys are cool with us discussing books in depth before we've given you guys a chance to read them. Because I know like on Hello Internet, they will sometimes discuss books, but they'll usually say like, we're going to discuss this book in 2 weeks. So here's your homework if you want to read it beforehand. Is that something you guys feel like we should do? Or do you guys just want us to do analysis of books and then let you read them afterwards? I mean, we're never going to do like an analysis of
we're not going to like spoil Game of Thrones.
Yeah, today we're going to pull some very important lessons
idea.
out of the newest Game of Thrones book by spoiling everything. No, we'll never do that. I mean, it's always going to be nonfiction, so I think it's pretty tough to spoil nonfiction. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
You can't spoil facts, Tom.
No, you can't. I guess you can't.
Roses are red. I didn't see a rose yet. Why would you tell me that?
It was coming.
I had no idea.
You just spoiled history for me, man. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the community thread for this episode. You can find the link to that at the show notes, which you'll find over at cigpodcast.com. And this is episode 107. So check the link on the page for that, and you'll find the link to the discussion thread, as well as all the stuff I mentioned earlier in the episode that I would link to. And yeah, I think that's about it. So thanks for listening so far. And until next week, stay cute.